Hi everyone, I'm Jed Shlackman. I work as a holistic counselor and spiritual energy healer. For this video, I'll be speaking about the topic of compassion, empathy, and sympathy. Those are words that are often used kind of interchangeably. So the concepts of compassion, empathy, and sympathy do overlap a lot, but we can make some subtle distinctions between them and how we're applying those words to look at how we're feeling about or relating to other people. So first we'll discuss compassion and how that word is typically used. When we speak of compassion, we're actually talking about caring about how someone else feels. So a person who's compassionate tends to show love and support to other people because it's important for them that the other person feels well. So you're giving some form of support because you're concerned for the feeling or well-being of another person or another being. And a person who has that capacity is seen as being compassionate. The word compassion kind of tells us that we're feeling with another person. So how that person feels, in a sense, affects how you're feeling. It's important to you that that other person feels well. Empathy is very similar to compassion. So with empathy, it's as though you are feeling what another person is feeling. You're concerned about someone else, about their feelings, their welfare. So we often say that we empathize with someone when we're hearing about something difficult they're going through, their suffering. We're in a sense connecting with that person and having understanding and care about that other person's suffering. So empathy is an important capacity for us to have as human beings. It helps us connect with other people. It helps us show concern for others. We think about the welfare or how someone else will feel before we act in certain ways in our life, since the feeling or well-being of another person matters to us. And that brings us next to the word sympathy. Sympathy, as the word would imply if you break it apart into sim and pathy, it has to do with feeling the same as another person, sympathizing with them in a sense. So if that other person is suffering, you bring into yourself a sense of what that suffering feels like. So if a person is grieving a loss, you can imagine in yourself what it feels like to be grieving a loss, and in a way you create that same feeling within yourself. So that's where sympathy comes in. It's actually having the same feeling that someone else is going through, in a way to honor that other person's feeling. So you're saying you sympathize with them, so you're feeling their pain with them in a sense, or their suffering. The challenge with that, and we could say it's a challenge with empathy and compassion as well, is that if another person is suffering and as part of your concern for their suffering, you attach to that feeling of suffering within yourself, you can bring yourself down, in a sense, into that lower emotional state and get stuck there, where you start to take on that emotional status when you don't really need to. So you can care about and understand someone else's suffering without attaching to the suffering, without generating that same state within yourself and potentially getting stuck in that state. So ideally we can learn to have that caring and compassion for others. We can be compassionate in a sense. We can show empathy, but we don't get stuck in that sympathy state where we're actually in the same suffering that the other person is in. Our suffering isn't going to help lift that other person out of their suffering. It may temporarily help them feel understood, and sometimes it's said that misery loves company. So someone who's in a low state, who's sad, who's grieving, who's upset, they might feel in some way supported or understood by someone else who's in that same state, but that isn't a solution to bring them out of that state. So we can ideally bring ourselves into a more neutral, balanced state as we empathize with someone else or have compassion for them. We can be conscious that we don't want to hurt someone, we don't want to cause them pain and suffering. So that helps us be mindful of how we're living and treating other people. But at the same time, if we have kind of the excess or extreme form of compassion and empathy, we might start to create our own suffering unnecessarily. We might constantly be, in a sense, absorbing other people's feelings or going into a sympathetic resonance with other people's feelings, where we take on the emotional state of whomever might be around us. And if we're around depressed people, we might start to feel depressed. If we're around angry people, we might start to feel angry. And you don't want to continue getting pulled into those states. Ideally, you can maintain your own desired state of being, so that even though you might perceive someone else is in distress or suffering, and you might be able to do something to, in some practical sense, support them, to help uplift them, you don't have to feel that suffering along with them to be able to help. You can be more centered and more balanced in your own emotional status while you are offering that support. So this is something I think that we can all be mindful about. We can all practice skills of being compassionate or empathetic without suffering, without being stuck in that sympathy where we're feeling the same suffering as someone else. That's not necessary. If you think about things in terms of energy and vibration, you can see how easy it might be to take on someone else's emotional state when they are feeling strong emotions. So a strong energy field tends to entrain the energy field of others around that person or group. So if someone is like super intensely angry and they're maintaining that state, then if you're in close proximity to that person and you're around them and feeling that energy, it's easy for you to start to go into resonance with it and for you to feel that same emotion that they're feeling. So it takes some self-discipline and self-mastery to maintain your own emotional or energetic state when you're around others who are projecting a strong emotion or strong energy. So if you're really super sensitive to others and how other people are feeling, you might very easily be pulled into their emotional state. Often people are referred to as empaths because they very easily feel what someone else is feeling, and it's a valuable skill or quality or ability to be able to sense, to understand what other people are feeling. However, if you allow your own energy to get pulled into that, then if the other person is having an unpleasant type of feeling, you can get stuck in that same unpleasant feeling. You can use the same capacity to actually uplift yourself. So if you're around people who are in joyful states, who are in excited states or elevated states, you might use that to lift yourself up into those states, to have that be a positive influence on how you're feeling. So in that case, it would be desirable, where having sympathy or empathy allows you to tune into those more pleasant emotions. So sympathy, empathy, and compassion are usually looked at in terms of having care or feeling for someone who's suffering, but we could actually use the same capability, the same energetic principle, to tune into a more positive emotional state and uplift ourselves rather than depress ourselves. So I would encourage each of you to think of it in that way, that it's not only about the suffering or the negative. The same principle of resonating with someone else's energy or emotion also can be present with the more quote unquote positive emotions, the more pleasant states. So you can allow yourself to be uplifted, but be mindful if you notice you're getting pulled down by other people's emotions. You don't have to allow yourself to be drawn into that lower frequency of emotion. It's also vital to understand that as beings with an emotional aspect to who we are, we do want to have that strong capability to empathize, to have compassion and understanding. That's very important to our social functioning, to our lives and relationships. So if we didn't have that capacity, we'd be constricted in what we're able to experience and appreciate in our lives. So we can be very grateful that we have deep feelings, that we have that compassion coming from our heart center. And if you'd like to learn more about energy, about emotional health and well-being, I invite you to read some books on these subjects. There are some resources and references I have on my website, which is phinsights.com, phinsights.com. You can also find information about healing and counseling services I provide and upcoming events. For now, I'd like to wish everyone a wonderful day. Namaste.